David, this is a gallop basically for the politics of the 20th century to the 21st century. It's about welfareism, the emergence of, about economic prosperity, but your conclusion is that neither of these two things seem to have actually made a great impact on our lives.
Well, I disagree that they've not made an impact. I think this essay really examines these wide forces from the point of view of the citizen. And I think at the beginning of the 20th century, the big battles that citizens had to win was really to get basic welfare, to get very basic participation in the political process. Not every man could vote at that time, and no women could vote in general elections. So these were big battles to be won. Now, broadly speaking, most of those contests have been concluded, and we fight, in more detail things about the nature of the health service and the sort of housing that's available, and get into more detail. And those challenges are not as big a knockout as the issues facing people, say, perhaps before the First World War. But one of the challenges I think that we now have, so that we eradicate a lot of the unfairness that has built up in modern capitalist societies, is to put the citizen at the heart of decision making, not the sole engine of decision making. I still think you need the deliberation of political institutions and the politicians in those institutions, but much more citizen involvement than we had in the earlier days of democracy, when it was pretty much, you vote every 4 or 5 years. And I think without that type of citizen involvement, we are going to see it become more and more difficult to keep our societies relevant to the major challenges they face.
But, the kind of focus in this is of the kind of institutions like Parliament and the relationship between Parliament and the devolved administrations. But it's still focused on that process. But if you take economics, for instance, do you see the citizens involved, like in, there was a movement at one time, workers' control of industry? I mean, they said that's a form of involvement. Do you see it going down that road in the industrial sphere?
Well, I understand why many people looked at those type of processes, and syndicalism was quite a strong movement in the South Wales coalfield, for instance. But I think that's a very old response to what were then the more dramatic challenges facing working people. I think what we now need is a way that people feel they have more involvement and control over their economic and social needs. And the way that can be done is through things like a more cooperative approach. So I do see there's a lot of opportunity, particularly in the more caring industries, to see people forming cooperatives and getting involved and in various enterprises, community development, community regeneration. These things people can do with some help in their own communities and form their own companies, but potentially, so that there's that way of doing it. But I think in terms of knowledge economies, people working together in teams, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for much more involvement of citizens. So the sort of boss and worker model is simply going to break down. And that's something that we should really celebrate, I think. But we do need also to ask ourselves, well, what happens if some people still can't access very highly paid, cannot access well-paid jobs, and cannot meet their basic requirements through a job that doesn't pay very much. And that's why I've asked whether some form of universal income might be necessary to maintain that level of dignity that all citizens should have.
In essence, the kind of democracy was based on the kind of slavery. There are parallels here, aren't there? There's a large number of people that feel disenfranchised, probably the people that you're talking about, people that are not in work, have little kind of connection with the society, least of all with a democratic process in that society, and they opted out. Are there parallels? Do we have to have an underclass for a democracy to work?
Well, no, I don't think democracy can work unless there's a very clear belief and commitment to what I call a foundational equality. So you cannot have an us and them. Now, some people will be in office-holding positions, you know, politicians are basically that, and have to do some of the heavy lifting because citizens can't do everything. If we go back to Athens, you're right that a minority were citizens, but the people that were citizens did the decision making. I mean, that's the difference between what went on then and what, you know, happens now. Whereas citizens now just generally vote for other people then to take decisions on their behalf and then to be held accountable afterwards. So I definitely think we need a much flatter system where there is more citizen involvement, and that, as I said, is based on this on a sense of equality, and we all need to be part of that. And so if the differences are so great that people actually feel, well, you know, there is an us and them situation, then I'm not sure that democracy as we understand it can really be sustained.
Is democracy the answer? I'm going to say we at the moment. I'm going to say we have the meeting, the 5-year meeting of the Chinese Communist Party, probably one of the most successful economies in the world at the moment, one that is making great strides, an advocate for globalism, all the things that perhaps 20, 30 years ago this country would be talking about. But yet, democracy is far away from that agenda.
Well, I don't think democracies ever can remove fundamental challenges from society, but they provide a means for their creative solution. Now, sometimes we're in less creative times, and the very forces of technological change, for instance, seem to drive all to certain choices, whether we like it or not. And I think that's part of what's going on at the moment, is that we feel kind of engulfed by these forces. But in time, the more reflective process of democracy, I think, will allow us to shape these forces more and make decisions. And there's a big difference between the creation and openness you get in a democracy and how that produces really productive solutions to problems. And the form of guardianship that, say, goes on in China, where you're right, you have a government there that says, well, we accept the welfare of the people is our principal goal, but we don't believe the people have a role in decision making, or at least nothing like that would be asserted in a democracy. But I don't think that model is likely to win out. I think that democracy fully meets the dignity of citizens and encourages them to flourish. You know, it's because democracy aims at this remarkable sense of human flourishing, what Jefferson called the pursuit of happiness, and what we now call perhaps well-being. It's an extraordinary high bar to set, but it is the one I think we should set. And no form of guardianship, far less any form of dictatorship, authoritarianism, ever remotely aims for that. So I'm convinced that people will continue to conclude that democracy is the best system.
Well, finally then, we come in from China back to Wales. Where do you see the Welsh Assembly and democracy in Wales going in the next few years?
Well, I think we should really enhance the potential of Wales as a small democracy, 3 million or so people. We have a political environment that encourages people to perhaps access political institutions more easily. Certainly in much of Wales that's the case, perhaps for North Wales less so. But I think one of the principal things we could do is to have a form of second chamber for the Assembly called the Citizens' Chamber. And it wouldn't be made up of a set number of citizens. The citizens involved would change from subject to subject and over the years. And it would allow them to discuss all sorts of issues and perhaps to send to the Senedd, to the formal National Assembly of elected politicians, some ideas that they feel need to be looked at, or challenges that need to be addressed. And I've called that a sort of Gwerins programme. So you'd have a Gwerin programme as well as the Welsh Government's legislative programme. I think we need new thinking, really, to ensure that democracy gets, a sense of rejuvenation. And the excitement of the early years of democracy was astonishing, that the people could elect their leaders. But now electing leaders is not quite enough. We need to go further. And so my best attempt at a way forward at the moment is to have a citizens' chamber, perhaps based in T. Howell. The old chamber is still there. But we could also have a chamber meeting up in North Wales as well, and West Wales, Mid Wales. It would allow this sort of flexibility.
And would they feed into the legislative programme?
Yeah, they would feed informally. I think that it wouldn't just be a sort of festival of democracy where we're encouraging local citizens to come along and discuss issues. That's very important and welcome. But if you had a citizens' chamber, you would be holding some form of sort of a ballot that you'd have, say, to select juries, so it would be random, and a certain number of people then would be asked if they would be prepared to come and discuss some issues for during the next year, and that might involve one day a month when they come to Cardiff, or they go to Llandudno, wherever it is that the Citizens' Chamber can meet. And then the proceedings would be recorded and formally fed into the structures of the assemblies or committees, and into plenary and to the Welsh Government as well.
Lovely. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.